every human employee, manager, or leader should ask themselves, when do I need to find the needle in the haystack? When do I need to predict and anticipate things? When do I need to create informed recommendations? And then depending on their role, they can build their own roadmap out of those building blocks. We will call them for now the 5 superpowers of AI.
This is AI First with Adam and Andy, the show that takes you straight to the front lines of AI innovation and business. I'm Andy Sack, alongside with my co-host, Adam Brotman. Each episode, we bring you candid conversations with business leaders who are transforming their businesses with AI. Straight talk, actionable use cases, and insights for you. Welcome, Brice and Adam.
Hey, Brice. Yeah, we're really thrilled. We were really looking forward to having you here on this show because, as you know, and many of our listeners may not know, we had an opportunity to spend some time with you and learning more about your background and Moderna's AI journey and transformation that you and the team that you work with have really pioneered. And for those, obviously we spent time with you. We wrote a chapter in our book, AI First, that really was sort of a hero chapter of our book because we were looking for case studies of companies and leaders that really understood the transformative power of Gen AI, not just in a bolt-on kind of a way, but in a fundamental, essential way. And we had read a little bit about what was out there about what Moderna had been doing. We were lucky enough that you allowed us to interview you and feature you in our book. And for those that haven't read the chapter, let me give you a quick 1-minute overview so that kind of set the table. And then Andy and I would love to spend some time asking you some questions. So the thing that people need to understand is the chapter in the book and our conversation with Brice focused on the fact that Brice was brought into Moderna specifically to help lead an AI transformation effort of sorts. And in the book, we outline and talk about how you got there and it wasn't like flip a switch and all of a sudden everyone could just have an AI transformation. In fact, you got to Moderna, I think, before ChatGPT was released publicly. And then as that came out, you had positioned yourself because you had done some really amazing things to sort of spot the technology stack and some of the infrastructure, how the workers were able to use technology needed to be shored up. You already obviously had buy-in from leadership to perform and implement and lead an AI transformation. And then when ChatGPT came out, you suddenly had a catalyst for a much easier to use platform to get everybody in the company sort of rallied around this idea of how Gen AI could really be a productivity lift, an innovation boost, et cetera. And so you talked us through that and talked about the fact that you have this really innovative way of getting everybody to try Gen AI internally by doing a kind of a prompt-a-thon type of a contest. And it really catalyzed and began the process that you ended up with, thousands of people using Gen AI, really embedding it into the culture and into the fabric of how Moderna works every day across multiple functions, and that you saw a lot of positive things that came from that. So that's the essence of what we talked to you about in a very, very high level, and would love to just sort of, for the benefit of ourselves and everyone else, kind of start asking you some questions about it. So I'll start just because Andy and I probably have a list of things we'd love to talk to you about. One is, we definitely hold you up and Moderna up as an example of a company that have the right mindset, that understood that, there wasn't a particular outcome in mind, but that you understood that this was a transformative technology that should be infused into everything the company does, almost like computers were back in the day, or the internet, or those kinds of essential utilities. And flash forward to now, and I'm gonna start with sort of an end of the movie question. Like, where have you found, generally speaking, to see the most positive results? Is there a particular function or a particular type of use that either surprised you or didn't surprise you, where you have found like that the company seems to be getting the most out of Gen AI? And I'm not denigrating other places that maybe aren't getting as much out of it, but could you kind of tell us and our listeners a little bit about where you're thinking that, this is really popping for you guys?
So thank you. Thank you for the recap and the great question. The one thing that strikes me is that generative AI is a very powerful tool when you have an important decision to make with a lot of data and short time. So this is not functionally specific or role specific, but I'll give you a couple of examples. So we have a very popular benefit GPT, and GPTs, for everyone's reference, are the names that we give to AI agents that are coded to do one thing and do it well. So in this case, that agent has digested in its knowledge base 600 pages worth of content on the benefits that Moderna offers. And as I speak to you, we just closed our open enrollment, 2 weeks during which you have to choose your benefits. And that's very little time and a lot of data to digest in order to make informed choices. And yet, this is very material. At the end, you're going to choose a healthcare plan, commuter benefits, a number of options are offered to you that can have a significant impact on your life. But then we famously also have a dose ID GPT that supports our clinical development team to evaluate the qualities of different drug candidates in terms of dosage in clinical trials. And as much as the decision still is the humans, there's thousands of pages worth of data, and you want to be as quick as you can in those clinical trials, and especially there's our back-to-back trials to get from the inception of the first idea that you have of a new potential treatment towards something that you can put on the market and that goes to patients. So I would have dozens of examples such as these ones to share, in which, whether it is for HR, for legal and complex contracts with deadlines, on clinical research, on filing patents, there's a clock ticking, there's a lot of information at play, and you need to make important decisions. And up to now, a lot of those were done with the best possible means available to humans, which is basically to read things and write hand notes and do the best you can. And these were not very efficient processes before, and they were not also very safe processes. There's only so much reliability that you can expect of a human who has hundreds or thousands of pages of information to digest before making an important decision. So I know that some people hearing us will think, ooh, having AI that maybe hallucinates and maybe generates wrong information support you for something in the field of science, but you would be amazed how those decision processes in our company, as in everyone else, really rely on human ability, which is itself constrained by what our mind can absorb and give back. So the combination of the experience, the wisdom, the ability to pinpoint something that is unusual and interesting, with the ability of AI to digest vast amounts of data, to categorize it instantly, to give it to you in a relatable narrative, and to anchor for you the things that seem the most important and insightful. The combination, which we're going to call this augmented work, the AI augmentation, shines, in my opinion, the best at the moment in the current state of the technology in those moments of decision making.
Brice, I'm curious, like, given the two examples, one being, I guess, internal benefits and the other being clinical trials, and then you mentioned a bunch of others. If we were to ask the executives, not the employees, the executives at Moderna, where they got the most return on their AI investment, what do you think they would say? Because I doubt that they would give me the same answer that you just did, which is your answer is excellent. This notion of short time frame and lots of data to make a decision, that makes a lot of sense. Like, AI is great at that.
I think so. We should break down what AI does in general and what Gen AI does in particular. So AI in general does 5 things for you. And I've been living with that framework for more than a decade now. It was already the framework I used at Google when I was the the global head of transformation there, and still today at Moderna. And it's very stable. So first, AI helps you with perception. Think about identifying a spelling error in your document or a tumor in an X-ray, or so finding the needle in the haystack, right? Like
Yep.
perceiving the signal in the noise. The second thing is very good at categorizing. Think about aggregating together customer segments, or organizing files in a folder, or songs in a playlist. The third one is very good at prediction, right? Anticipating the consumption in terms of energy of the city based on the past trends, or even weather forecasts. The fourth thing, it does recommendation. And it, of course, each of the things I mentioned kind of includes the previous ones. So, but for instance, inviting you to take one path rather than an hour in Google Maps to get from home to work because it's going to gain you 3 or 5 minutes, right? And or if I go back to my playlist example, recommending the next song in the playlist out of thousands that you've never heard before. And the fifth one is good at generation. And this is not specific to Gen AI. Remember when we already had autocomplete in emails, and you would start your email with a few words, it would propose
Yep.
the next word. It's just that generative AI has put that feature of AI in general, of machine learning, under steroids. And now instead of the next 2 words, it does the whole email as a draft for you to think upon. So we have here 5 core pillars that every human employee, manager, or leader should ask themselves: when do I need to find the needle in the haystack? When do I need to predict and anticipate things? When do I need to create informed recommendations? And then, depending on their role, they can build their own roadmap out of those building blocks. We will call them for now the 5 superpowers of AI. Now, with all those superpowers combined, Gen AI does 4 things, integrated things that are really useful. The first one is a good assistant, right? It can help as your personal assistant to do something. The second one, it's a pretty good coach to give you feedback on ongoing work, a draft or something, or even something you plan to say, the words, the arguments, the way of working. The third, it's a great creative partner, right? You can bounce ideas off of it. It will bounce them back to you and add some. And the fourth, it's a pretty good expert. It has huge knowledge. And actually, the hallucination topic only plays in that fourth bucket. AI doesn't hallucinate ideation, doesn't hallucinate coaching, doesn't hallucinate assistance. It only, when it is required to give an answer and it doesn't have the data, as most humans would do, by the way, hallucinates the answer, which for humans we call, gaslighting you or whatever. So there's one case in which you should be careful. It's when you're asking these generative AI models to be your expert, but you haven't given them the knowledge to be your experts, and you're asking them tough questions, right? That's a point which you have to bake into your culture to not push too far. So if I go back to the leaders, to your question, the leaders find fantastic assistance in generative AI when they have to summarize a 120-page deck to make a quick address to the whole company, when they have to speak at a public conference, and very soon it veers towards the creative partner and towards the coach. Is that the right tone for the right audience? What other idea could I think of? What would be a great question with which to start a meeting that I have with this very important stakeholder? And then, of course, the last one, the knowledge one, leaders are less expected to be subject matter experts of any given component of the company. It's the beauty of their role that they should understand and be able to have a conversation, but that the combination of all of this is what matters to their efficiency. It doesn't mean there's no expertise involved. It can be being expert at doing quarterly earnings results and having the conversation, being experts at handling government regulation authorities and how to discuss with them. So all those 4 personas, if you will, of the combination of the 5 superpowers to create AI agents that are by your side, I think are still useful to our leaders. And those among our leaders who have embraced them the most, I can see already after 18 months how their leadership has heightened to new levels. and they've been recognized for it. We have 2 new EC members at Moderna that have been publicized, Rose Laughlin and Jackie Miller. And both of them are among the very early trailblazers of leveraging AI for their organizations and are now the first inside promoted EC members in the history of Moderna. And it's absolutely not a coincidence.
Let me nudge you a little bit on this because what we're really trying to do with this conversation and with the podcast is help the people that have it. I mean, you've been working on AI digital transformation for 4 or 5 years at Moderna, and that really you're so far ahead of any other company that we've encountered. And so everybody the chapter speaks to it. It's why we did 2 sessions with you. So my question of what would the executive say? Your structure's awesome. It's an awesome answer. And yet it's not simple enough, I don't think, for someone who's, if I'm an executive and I haven't yet embarked on the journey and I have the opportunity, I really want to know from Moderna's experience in simple business language, where's the return? What can I expect?
All right.
How would you answer that for someone who's considering going deep on an AI transformation experience?
Okay. Well, I think I'll give you concrete examples. There's one of our executive leaders who had a recording to make for a conference that was very important to our future and had an hour to prepare for it and deliver the recording, the 10-minute recording. So they jotted down bullet points, ran them through ChatGPT to have organized narrative and structure using their usual way of speaking and their language, because we do persona-based GPTs that read things that you've said or that you've recorded before, learn your style and give it back in your style so that it's very fluid for you to express yourself. That's your own language.
Yep.
And that executive just put it on the teleprompter, did their recording for 10 minutes, shot it at the conference, and was done in 30 minutes on something that they felt was challenging to accomplish in an hour. I have another concrete example recently of an executive who had 17 quarterly evaluation meetings with their directs, so a very large team, and had to document within a corporate application all of the components of those conversations. In their case, they had recorded them and had transcripts. So we created together a small tool, which it took us 15 years to design, that would help them break down the transcript of the recording into the 8 categories of input that they need for the system, and then read over those and change a few things that they think could be expressed differently, and then have them published in the corporate application, which would probably have been something that would have taken them a couple of hours before and have had a much lesser quality of outcome, because how much time can you spend on those things when you have so many things to do? So in both those cases, I see executives getting out of their way, as you would expect, things that need to be done thoughtfully, because whether it is a recording that's going to be seen potentially by, in that case, millions of people, all right, in that very large audience and then staying online, or a very important moment in our corporate life, which is about performance evaluation and calibration and talent management, in which you should never let the AI do the talent management, but have it support the way that you think about it and be your coach and your guide and bounce off idea and help you implement it efficiently. In both those cases, I think our leaders found the tool very useful for them. And those are examples from last week, both of them. Right? On any given week, I would have come up to my field 10 or 20 examples. But the truth is, and I want to highlight this, we have more than 1 million conversations a month on ChatGPT Enterprise at Moderna. 1 million a month.
I'm sorry,
Like
did you say 1
1
million a
million
month?
1 million conversations a month, more than 1 million a month.
That's 50,000 a day out of 20 work days. So it's
And how many?
we're a
And roughly
6,000 people
that's
company.
6,000 person. Yeah.
There is so much that I don't know, right? It comes to my level of attention when the criticality of it, implies that the leaders would want to have my team by their side to think about something, create a tool, share it with their peers or things like this. So some of our leaders probably still also need to make this into their comfort zone and have not fully baked this in their ways of working, because if we're honest, at the moment, generative AI is useful to people who have a lot of mundane tasks, who do a lot of corrections, redlining, edits, so who are rather in the middle management layers or even as individual contributors, right? Like if you're that kind of work and you have a lot of manual repetitive tasks, things that basically if you spend more than 5 minutes doing something that you do more than twice a week, you should immediately have a green flag in your mind to use AI for it. And that's more going to be the case of someone who has a very assigned role than of someone who's a top leader and by definition is going to have a very moving goalpost in what they should deliver and a lot of personal influence, very different each time on how they treat this. And that's what they're expected to do. But still, I hope I gave you a couple of concrete examples there.
No, those are great examples. I want to pull the thread on this a little bit because I think this is really interesting. One, first of all, you mentioned there's going to be more of a not obvious, but semi-obvious opportunities for assigned roles that have more repetitive type tasks to allow AI to help them. And then you mentioned, as opposed to say top leaders that are somewhat have more of an amorphous decision-making and leadership role. Although the irony is you said it's really good when you have to make big decisions quickly with a lot of data, which a lot of big top leaders have to do. But let me go back to something you said. And I want to ask you, Brice, I want to characterize your answer to Andy's question slightly in my own words. And I want you to honestly tell me if this is how you feel as someone who's living it. All of your examples that I'm hearing are finding these variety of opportunities for AI to augment and improve and speed up the things that you're supposed to be doing every day in your job as a knowledge worker, as a worker, and as a leader, as a worker. And so in theory, if it's giving you a speed improvement, a throughput improvement, and a quality improvement on some level, and it might vary from task to task, from day to day, but if it's happening across the board, by definition, if you were to step back in the aggregate and say, a company that really is properly trained and proficient and understands the power of AI and is using it as much as possible where it makes sense, that company across every function will have a step change improvement in its throughput, capacity, and productivity, as well as quality of decision making, partly because it's being augmented by AI, but also because when you're freed up with more time, that also likely will help you get to better qualitative outcomes as well. So you have this double, triple compounding effect if AI is being used at that aggregate level. Am I so far, is that sort of how you would describe the end result that you're trying to achieve? And it becomes the ROI, if you will, or the return is in the aggregate of all these micro moments that are some important, some less important, but they all add up to the overall outcome. Am I on the right track?
Oh, thank you so much for asking it this way. I want to quickly highlight something. Most of the leaders have people reporting to them who are architects of choice, who present them options with recommendations and pros and cons. And then based on this architecture, they make decisions. But normally, if you're the leader of a company with the type of cloud that Moderna has, you don't go around making decisions on your own, regardless of the way that they've been architected for you by the teams who are in charge of the feed. So I say this because those are the teams who need AI. And then as a leader, you're going to receive the architecture of choice and you're going to be able to make informed decisions thanks to them. And that's a very complex dynamic in which we could, discuss at length the place that AI takes at every step of that process. And so that's why I think that even though it's useful for decision making in short amount of time with huge amounts of data, I think it serves the architects of choice more than it serves the decision makers. Now, that being said, the question that Andy asked me was if I would ask your executives today, what would they say? And that's why I gave you the step one of change, where I think our executives today are firmly anchored, which is improving the things you do already. This is not at all the goalpost or the destination. This is just answering the exact question that was asked of me. Because the next thing that happens is that you're going to change the things that you're doing instead of improving them. And by the way, in my example of the leader who has transcripts of their discussions for performance, this is already an enhanced way of working because I would posit here that if it wasn't for the ability of AI to ingest those transcripts and do something useful with them, they would not be having transcripts of the conversations, right? They would probably just have conversations and jot down notes. So we're already seeing in that example how someone moved from adoption to proficiency to new way of working, right? And the fourth step of this is rebuilding your business with an AI first principle to the logic of your book and of our interview. It is redefining your roadmap in a post AI world, or we could even say probably at this point in a post AGI world, anticipating that this kind of augmented intelligence is soon going to be able to generalize, which means take knowledge in one field and apply it in another. And that if you have artificial generalized intelligence, you can't work the way you used to. Just the way that if you have laptops, you can't work the way you used to, right? Like you're not going to use a typewriter, do carbon copies and send them in tubes anymore, right? Because something else is going to happen. And we already see, I'll give you some things that I find very positive. One of them is the contribution in cross-functional teams has exploded in capability and in efficiency in our environment, because people are no longer constrained by the lack of knowledge or the lack of expertise on topics that are bordering theirs and that they need to collaborate with. They can leverage generative AI to ask a lot of questions, to create courses for themselves, to deep dive into something that was something they knew of, but they could not have led a much deeper conversation with, and now they're going to become much more at ease in those cross-functional workloads. And the silo breaking capability of GenAI here is huge. The second one is it improves the morale of people. Like, it's good for their well-being at work. We have measurable evidence now that people feel better when they have an agent which, in privacy, without emitting any judgment, will listen to any question they have and help them get out of, if you will, a state of being prisoner of your own lack of capability, knowledge, or even sometimes being able to bounce off ideas with someone, or in this case, with the model, with the agent, to pressure test a little bit your hypothesis before you present them to a larger audience or to your managers or to your peers. So the ability to understand each other better because we don't have this huge knowledge gap anymore. The ability to have some support by a friendly private companion mode that is by our side is both helping already rewire entirely the processes of the company and make people feel better about it. And those two things combined, they shouldn't be taken for granted, because it's one thing to have access to new technology, and it's a whole different thing to feel not only comfortable but elated with it. And in this way, I think we're in for a huge productivity boost with or without the catalyst of transformation, because you can always count on humans to do in less time something important, to do a more pleasurable way something that is hard, and to be imaginative about the way this should go forward, because a lot of people have a lot of ideas and want to be owners of their own future.
I'm conscious that we only have Brice for 20 or 30 more minutes, and I have a slew of questions. So I'm going to let you go first, Adam.
Okay. So this is great, but I'm going to take the conversation in a slightly different direction, Andy,
Great.
if that's okay. Yeah. So what we've talked about is, and that was fascinating. I have to say, speaking of working in a different way, I can't wait to go back and re-listen to this conversation. Brice, I always get this from you because you think about this topic in such a deep way.
Have you
And we're used to spending a lot of time.
talked about this topic with AI, with generative
Yeah,
AI?
exactly. Yeah, no kidding. Because I love the way that, Brice, you just talked about, yes, it's about productivity and improvement, but it's actually a different way of working. And then that's a holistic statement that is very in line with how Andy and I think, but we spend most of our day just trying to explain to people that this is not just a slightly better Google,
Yeah.
and that this is actually fundamental. And then to be able to have a conversation with you where you're so far beyond where we are, even in terms of seeing it in action. We have little bits and pieces, and so it's really helpful when we try to get you to talk about the uplift, the ROI, the outcomes, like where you go. Now, let's switch gears for a second. That's about the end of the movie, or not the end of the movie, but at least sort of the throughput and results, if you will, of what comes if somebody's working this different way. Let's go back though. So and we talk about this in the book, and for our listeners, there's this notion of there was a time where you had, I'll call it 5,000 or so, give or take, employees and workers and leaders at Moderna who, for the very first time, were going to be exposed to this notion of working with Gen AI and incorporating it into their workflow. And you went through a process with a promptathon, if you will, and a champions council that you established. Can you go back? Let's go back upstream and talk about, now looking back, what would be your, if you're, say someone's listening to this podcast and they're like, I want to be AI first. And I know there's a lot of technical stuff I got to think about in terms of like an academy and onboarding and technical issues, but like from a cultural perspective, from a behavioral change perspective, what would be your advice to somebody that's just starting out about how they sort of do as much as they can to facilitate a smooth transition to a company embracing this?
So I want to say this very basic, but I think, profound thing to begin with. It's very hard to think of people as solutions when you think of them as problems. It isn't human to have both notions in your mind at the same time. So if you start in this problem, in this challenge, thinking, I have X thousands of employees, and they are problems to me because they are used to one way of working and I have to move them to another way of working, you're really setting yourself up for failure. Because the truth here is that if you have X thousand of employees, you have X thousand solutions that are just given to you. People who love change, we love change. We love a new book, a new movie, a new lover, a new president, a new dress, a new season of fashion, a new makeup brand, a new computer, a new software. We love novelty in every and all domains of our lives. We are neophytes, the humans. And we love them under certain conditions, three mostly. The first one, they have to be handed to us in a progressive fashion. Like we don't like change that is falling in our garden as a meteorite, right? Like we need to have a way to wrap our mind around it in time. The second, we have to have a word to say about it. We need to be part of the change. I will accept smartphones, but I want to choose the applications and the screen saver and the ringtone or things like this, right? Like I want to be a part of this change. I don't want just it to be entirely imposed to me. And the third one, I don't want to be alone in change. This has to be something collective. I want and need people around me to be going through the change as well so that we can support each other and that we can move the norm together seamlessly and simultaneously. If those three things are done and you give people something that is progressive, that is proactive, and that is collective, right, in the way that you bring it to them, you have X thousand of solutions. And that's why we did what you call the promptathon, which was very simply, we acknowledged the fact that there was going to be published Shadow AI. So we got access to all the Gen AI domains or agents out there. But in exchange, we provided one which we thought was best of breed. We gave a client to everyone who had a Moderna email that they could use and that had an API to the latest engine by OpenAI, which at the time was GPT-4. And we made sure that their data was safe and that their conversations were private, right? We installed a zero data retention policy. We made sure that we were SOC 2 HIPAA compliant. We have a OneTrust audit that we applied to this. And at the end of those basically 1-2 weeks of work, we had something in place, quick and efficient, that anyone could try with, and they were very safe with it. And at that point, they need to be telling us how to drive the change there. Like, how is this useful to you? What are you doing today that you couldn't do yesterday? And as you know, because we discussed this for the book, we came out with 180 solid propositions of AI-driven use cases. And we wrote this blog post for the whole company on our intranet, which came to the first page of the intranet, where it had a lot of visibility, titled 180 Things We Learned From You on AI. And that set the tone that we were going to certainly not impose something, especially on a technology that is the fastest adopted technology in the history of mankind, with like 100 million users in a matter of weeks, if I remember correctly, in the very first days of OpenAI. When you see those rocket ship technologies that everyone starts to embrace in huge numbers, why would you force it on people, right? Like, if anything, you have to kind of channel their energy towards it and make them feel safe and make them feel elated, try things and share with each other what they found. As you know, we had this prompt contest, had winners per EC reporting line. So we were sure that we would have people from all over the company, and you would win if you were upvoted by your peers in a public channel. So it was a popularity contest, which you might say is the wrong idea. But what we were looking for are champions, people who can embrace the technology and lead others to embrace this. And for this, you need them to be popular. You can't have someone at the end of a corridor who's grumpy and negative and you just had like one efficient idea and make them into a champion, right? Like, this is probably not going to be my first draft as a candidate. So, you know, from seeing people who've had hundreds of people upvote their idea, out of both the quality of the idea and the quality of the relationship with the rest of the company, that they're going to be, useful champions to promote what they found to be something super interesting and useful. And so it's a long answer to your question, but I wanted to explain why and give concrete examples, piggybacking on your relation to the promptathon. You need, as a change leader, to not want it more than your users, but just capture the energy that they have, understand that you have populations of adopters, that some of them will be first adopters and some others will be inspired by them later on. But trust them, right? Like,
I
trust your
mean,
people to
right,
want it for themselves, to want to use them and make them safe. And then for those who are successful, give them a megaphone.
Bryce, I just want to comment that you're like all your prior answers, but this one in particular struck me. It's a beautiful answer in the sense that you start by saying, I mean, if you had asked me before, I would be like, no, people don't like change. And you actually start by saying, no, people love change when it's presented in the right way. And then you have the conditions with which people like change. And it's really counter, particularly when talking about AI, because there's a lot of fear. And there's also, from a business perspective, there's a lot of, because of the speed of development of technology, there's threats to, there's fundamental threats to businesses' existence and obsolescence that arise as a result of the speed with which the technology is developing. And certainly there's the topic of layoffs, which is something that Moderna did not do. And so your answer was just a beautiful answer. So I applaud it.
And I think on the topic of layoffs, I'm going to talk about a fundamental trait of humans again. Hey, let's do a little bit of some really basic things. We have left brain, right brain. These are common to every living creature which has a spine, right? All the vertebrates have a left brain and a right brain. One of them is basically meant to understand what we can eat, and the other one to imagine what could eat us. It's to eat and not to be eaten. So the
Yeah.
brain that is about what
Fight
can
or
I
flight.
eat is analytical, and in times of peace will say, is this safe or not safe for me? And we'll analyze things to make sure that the color, the shape, the sound, the taste, it's all good. I can eat this. The other one, though, the other brain, the imaginative brain, the right brain, jumps to conclusions. There's something moving in the woods. I'm going to run the other direction, right? We are not very high in the food chain, naturally speaking, before the cognitive revolution. And so we tend to be fearful species, right? Like the humans. And so that part of us, the imagination, is mostly here to inform us of predation and a very negative outcome of situations. That's why when you turn off the light in the bedroom of children, they see monsters in the closet that are out to eat them, and not, fairies or treasure chests or candy, right? Like, this is not what happens in the children's bedroom when the dark comes. And we are still those same humans who, when you turn off the light, we see monsters. So relying on imagination to produce positive ideas and optimistic perspectives is completely counterintuitive. And it's reckless if you don't know what you're doing. Of course, people will go straight to the darkest possible outcome of something new, which is, I'm going to lose my job and the whole society is going to just topple and we're going to be ruled by, overlords of AI. But there's a spectrum in this in which we need to use our reflective brain to pause, to breathe, to watch the birds in the sky, and to realize that no, the world is still here. We're going to be just fine. And yes, there's going to be skill displacement. We already said this in this podcast. Some people who used to do a lot of manual tasks are going to have less of them to do. It liberates some time to do other things. Some jobs were like almost entirely manual tasks. And those roles would need to be rotated and elevated. Some others had much less reliance on them and would have a different outcome. But we all live with these concepts of a role, let's say a HR manager, let's say a lawyer in a company, which are bundles of dynamic skills. Maybe a lawyer has 20 skills, and 5 of them were not there 5 years ago, and 10 of them won't be there in 5 years. Dynamic skills libraries. And yes, there is an acceleration of the dynamic skills of every role. And maybe some of the roles will have to be reconceptualized. Like there will no longer be enough dynamic skills in them to justify a role. But I think this is an extreme outlier. I think for the most part, most people will find that their role has a rotation of skills, that some of the things that they needed to do was necessary for the role are no longer needed to do because they have a very smart companion by their side to support them, and that they're going to acquire new skills, new capabilities, new understanding that are going to be very useful to their future. And if anything, fun, because full of change. Who wants to have the same workday every day for all your life? So it's very promising to have a different workday in a few months or in a few years and become kind of Tony Stark, right? With Jarvis. For everyone who enjoys Iron Man, he doesn't work alone, right? Like he doesn't have all those ideas like himself in the void. He has an AI assistant who dialogues with him all the time when he's trying to accomplish something. And that's a positive outcome. This is the fairy, the treasure chest, or the candy in the room at night. You see what I'm saying, right? And
Yep.
I want us to be able to balance those things, because otherwise we're going to be prisoners of our natural inclination for fear and for devastation. Our imaginative brain is meant to fight predation. Let's not let it take it over. Like we've been there before, right? No 3G antennas didn't fry our brains. No trains didn't dissolve our internal organs. No electricity didn't kill our nervous systems. Like all those things didn't happen. And once again, we're going to find in a few years that yes, change happened, but no catastrophe did not happen.
Last question is, since you're kind of ahead of most, to say the least, most other companies in the space, you've had probably more experience in seeing when an employee needs some help sort of overcoming their fear, as you just said, and you gave some good examples just now verbally about the kinds of mindset orientations that might help somebody sort of understand the positivities here and overcome their fear. Do you specifically, though, tactically, you have the generative AI champions team at Moderna. Is that who you rely on mostly to help kind of evangelize and prop up those workers that aren't using it as much every day? Or can you give some tips and tricks about what you've learned about, how do you get like more fulsome adoption within an organization?
Of course. And I want for everyone who listens to us to relate to something that they've lived already, which is the generalization of smartphones, let's say, right? There was a time when you hadn't seen them ever. And now we come to a time when someone doesn't have a smartphone, it becomes strange. Like it's unusual, right? Like it can be whichever brand, whichever breed can be. And so, but there were 8 years, somewhere between 2008 and maybe 2016, I would say, in which we had this big S-curve of adoption. And so what happened there? First, people around you started using them. Like I think everyone, I often do this show of hand when I'm in public speaking situations where I say, who here remembers the first time they saw an iPhone? And usually I had the whole room raising their hand. Like there's this moment when you had the realization that, wow, you were holding in your hand something that was going to be a huge change in your life.
Mhm.
And I would say that most people remember the first time they interacted with generative AI and got out of it one of those results, which now we're starting to get used to, but let's not be jaded. It's pretty extraordinary to have an actual
Brice, I call them
conversation
the holy shit moments.
with the software, right? So there's this moment, and that kind of kicks the whole chain reaction. And then what's going to happen is that you need to trust the population dynamics. You need to trust that some people are just more comfortable with change, and will adopt this heads on and just experiment with it, try it. They will have less fear, be more affirmed in their past or in their experience with trying new things. It's part of what they do or how they're perceived by their environment. And they will explore the field and they will show the others, the rewards and the risks of trying it. And so that's why I want to say, like, these things don't happen overnight either. From the moment that I saw the first iPhone in my life to the moment that I only saw smartphones all around me, it was almost a decade. Even though smartphones are such fantastic tools, they were not an overnight adoption. It wasn't like 2 months and then we're done. It was more like 10 years and then we're done. And so you have to give it time. Transformation is more a catalyst to accelerate this chain reaction than it is an overpowering effort to make it happen. It's going to happen anyways. It's more a matter of like how fast can you get there, how safely can you get there, and how much quality of outcome can you get out of it in this span of time, right? So trust the chain reaction, trust the people who want to get there and to do the most of technology. Give a megaphone to those who have found something interesting. Don't speak for the change. Let them speak for the change. And it doesn't matter the scale, because if you have 1,000,000 people, then start with 10,000, and if you have 1,000 people, then start with 100. Those mechanisms, they scale amazingly, right? They are very efficient for this. And just keep listening, and also keep listening to people who are not on board. Most often, if they are resistant to change, and I mean like actively resistant to change, it's because they care. It's because they care about the company, they care about the outcome, they care about the job, and they've seen something that is not going to work from their perspective in using this technology for the job. And if they care, then I care. Then I want to listen to them to understand why. We need to get out, by the way, of this crazy, black or white, 0 or 1 conversations in which we talk to each other instead of speaking with each other. And especially in the world of enterprise, right? This should not be an environment of opposition and principles, but of tolerance and listening skills to people who have a very different perspective from yours, because they hold a piece of truth. And they would never be so active with it if they didn't profoundly care about the future of the company. They would just then go there. They'd be like, all right, sure, AI, don't go, I don't care. They would be careless, but they're not careless, right? And if they are not careless, then you should be attentive, because this is how also you improve either the technology, which still has a lot of improvement ahead of it. Let's just, by the way, acknowledge this is in the infancy of the technology right now. Improve the way that you bring it to people, the way that it's made available to them, the clients, the agents, and so on. Improve the learning programs and the way that you educate, make everyone aware and help them wrap their mind around it. So even the people who oppose the change, they are on your side. They are also solutions. They are the ones who would show you the little problem that you didn't perceive because you were, into your own momentum, through your own motion, and they are a reality check to your desire, right? You want change to happen fast. You want it to be fantastic and brilliant, and to find yourself on the podcast with Adam and Andy. Pause there for a second. Listen to people who have a very different opinion, who are vocal about this, because they hold the key to your future and to your common future. Once you've unlocked that key, those people will jump immediately from one end of the spectrum to the other end of the spectrum and become the biggest champions ever.
Great.
Brice, a really wonderful sentiment, particularly in our day and age and our world, not just applicable to AI, but to other areas of life, particularly following the really contentious election in the United States. So with that, Brice, I want to tell the leaders that this conversation was just a smattering of what, I think we've now spent 4 hours together talking, and we did our best to summarize our prior conversations in the book. So I encourage everyone to check out AI First, the book, and particularly the chapter on Moderna, because there's a lot of gems in there about how to proceed with AI First digital transformation. I want to thank you, Brice, for the 4 hours of time and really educating Adam and I, because you really are a business leader who's thought about change generally and digital transformation specifically as it relates to AI and being AI first, more specifically, more than anyone that we had met. So thank you for your time. Adam, we just got done with that session with Brice Challamel from Moderna. Let's do our debrief.
Our post-game wrap-up. Brice is awesome. I mean, you can see for any of you who just listened to it, he's probably the leading expert on AI transformation in corporate setting in the world. Like he literally was working on that before there was even ChatGPT. He was plucked out of Google for that purpose by Moderna. And as you could just hear, like he just gives these incredibly thoughtful answers, deep, thoughtful answers to why they're doing it, how it's transforming work. It's much deeper than you and I are ever allowed to go in most of our days because we're usually trying to like get to the brass tacks of like, should they do this? What systems should they use? How does this even work? And so to hear him at that like level, it's almost like talking to someone from the future, and he's explaining how this goes. And I thought it would be worth maybe starting out you and I by saying that there was a stat he mentioned, and it kind of went by, and we both talked about it. But he talked about how they're at Moderna with 5,000 employees. They just crossed the 1 million chats per month mark amongst their employees. And that's a remarkable implementation success of a whole workforce using AI every day. And when you and I both pressed him for like, what's the outcome? Give us examples. You gave some examples of some bots and whatever, but man, you know what I think it is? I think it's 1 million different little uplifts that happen every month at that company, and they compound and they aggregate to just a tremendous amount of qualitative and quantitative throughput and productivity improvements for the company. And, it's almost like self-evident if you have 1 million of them a month that's going to be giving you tremendous uplift. And he almost talks about it that way, like as in, well, there's 1 million of these things and it's transforming the way we work, and we're obviously so much better for it. And it gives us back so much time to do these other things. And we're sitting here going, how do you quantify that? But the truth
Yeah, I
is it's
mean,
pretty self-evident.
our job and this whole podcast is really about translating AI into real world business use cases, the successes and failures of business leaders trying to transform their businesses with AI. And then along comes Brice, who's I agree with you, like totally a leader, incredibly smart and intelligent. It's a lot more about this than you and I, and is more nuanced and articulate and academic. And so when pressed on, can you, what would your other executive, he doesn't answer any question straight with a 1, 2, 3. We have a translation job between Brice and our listeners. And I think you zeroed in on really the one segment, which was the most substantive, that I think struck both of us, which was 1 million messages per month. Yeah, the fact it was 1 million messages a month, and he told us that just as we were ending, that it's growing at 20% per month, which is a staggering growth rate for any digital product.
Yeah.
So it's 6,000 employees generating 1 million a month, going to 1.2 million per month next month.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because we were like, well, where are you getting the biggest bang for your buck? Or where, what functions are getting the most out of it? And
yeah, we wanted a clear success story or failure story.
Yeah.
And he basically said, oh, it's where there's data and there's a need to process that data quickly, which is a good answer for a success, but it didn't really give us
yeah, because he was coming, you're right. He was coming from the perspective of, hey, it's happening all over the company. It's almost like peanut buttered across the company. And at that point, you're like asking me to tell you who's getting the most out of their computers. Like, I don't know, like, everybody. And not everybody's
Yeah.
and there's some people that are better at, spreadsheets and emails and using the internet than others, but everybody's using it on some level, right?
Yeah, you're right. And for his answer to be the number one use case was employee benefit, which I totally believe that the employee benefits program, which is a short-term decision that needs to be made in a couple of weeks, and it's incredibly personalized family to family. Like, it's a great example of where AI could be useful. I'd be willing to bet that the executives would not pick that same use case as the one that provided the biggest ROI.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah,
Anything else stand out that that you'd want to translate for our listeners?
he said something about the transformation of the way you work. It's not just the tactical examples that we were eager to get. He was saying, if you're using it all the time and really understanding, and I like to use some of the words that we use, maybe feel good about us. He talked about if you're proficient, if you've been educated, trained, and are proficient, and you're bringing it to AI to the table all the time. He's like, you can't help but change the way you work. He mentioned the example of a transcript of a call and a transcript of a performance review or those kind of things. He said, just the act of trying to record it and then feeding it to AI, you've already transformed the way you work. Like, regardless of what comes out at the other end, that AI summarizes and gives you these pockets of things to think about, and then you go in and you edit it and you give a great performance review. You've just up leveled and transformed the way you work, is what his point was. And if that's happening across the entire organization, I think that's something you and I probably should hover over more, which is a true AI first organization sort of transcends just an improvement in processes and a speed and productivity lift, and it becomes a different company. It becomes a different workforce. Your light just went off again. And so I don't know, that struck me as something that, because you and I keep trying to visualize, like, what does a truly AI first company look like? And we talk about it, and he's actually living in that right now, I think.
Well, I'll just add the thing that he already said that, he said that, and he also stated that he felt like he was in the first inning, maybe the end of the first inning of digital transformation at Moderna. And that really, that's, they still have executives that aren't using it as much as other people. And they yes, it's broad-based usage, and yes, it's growing 20% a month, but, and yes, the 6,000 people are performing at a higher productivity, and it's early even at Moderna. And so that's what he expects to come, let's just say in the next year to two at Moderna, both as the technology continues to advance, but also the way in which they work
Yeah.
changes.
Yeah. Yeah. And, he made a comment at the end about like, here comes AGI. And by the way, it doesn't mean it's coming in 6 months. It could be in 18 or 28 months, but he's like, it's in the nearish horizon. It's not 10 years away. It's, 3 years away or 4 years away or whatever. And meaning like, infinite memory, text to action, agentic systems that haven't even like landed yet. And think about with 1 million chats a month, when those capabilities start to come. I mean, it's gonna.
The thing that struck, this is me just reacting to he's really what you want in the type of person to assist in leading change. Like, his answer to your question, like, you tried to summarize and package up what he was saying in language that that was more succinct, that our listeners could understand. And he thanked you for positioning your question the way in which you did. And he also was like, at the end, he made the comment about like the people that are naysayers are saying that because they care. He's just a very thoughtful, respectful, inclusive
Yeah.
human being, which makes him a good change agent. And my sense is he's getting a lot of credit, but it doesn't seem like he's out for the credit.
He definitely seems like somebody who's, he's living the thing that we're trying to visualize and encourage and facilitate companies to start a journey on. He's like in that journey, and you can just hear it, remember, I think I may have mentioned either on the podcast or after, I said, oh yeah, when he talked about like, I remember when we were at 2,000 chats a month and 5,000 chats a month, and he's like,
Yeah.
1 million. And I reminded me of Starbucks mobile order on pay. Like, at some point the thing just blossoms and it's just alive and it's just happening. And, he definitely talks like someone who's in the middle of that. And that's what's so great for you and I and our readers and our listeners, is like, I think we picked a good case study. I think Brice is awesome, and you can tell from our conversations with him. But I just feel like there was we were drawn to the Moderna story. We didn't even know about Brice really, other than like his name was in this one thing. And then when we got to talk to him, we're like, oh my God, this wasn't like some bolt-on initiative, shiny object. This was like an incredibly multi-year thought through thing. They brought the team in and they did all stuff before even ChatGPT came out. He's an inspiration. And I do think you have to translate it a little bit because it's like, wait a minute. Like for example, he said at the end, he used words like, again, if I was listening to it or watching a transcript of it, I would have highlighted where he said, I asked, what does it take to get people that aren't using it enough to sort of get encouraged to use it? And he said, oh, it's like the iPhone. And, you just got to like give it time. And like eventually there'll be this chain reaction and all of a sudden it's everybody, but it could take 8 years and some people go fast. And I was like, yeah. And by the way, without revealing anything confidentially, I don't think he was telling us that like, basically 80% of their workforce. I mean, it was in our case study in our book. He's talked about it before. Like he's talking about like 80% of people using it a lot. That's how you get to the million. So he's like, I'm not worried about the 20%. They'll get there on their own schedule, Whereas we're trying to get companies to get leadership to buy into this and, get a visual of it. So I'm hoping people listen to this and are inspired.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like I said, he's the type of person that you want to lead change. And you can, when listening to that episode, even though it's academic, he is and sounds academic. He's incredibly insightful and definitely has the right persona to initiate and foster change. It's like a gardener who plants seeds and, very methodically waters it, make sure sunlight comes, but also knows that you can't rush it, right? Like you have to do it. And I balance that with really many, like some of what we're trying to do, which is like, we really do see the kind of change that he's talking about. Like we're very interested in what that new way of working and what does it mean to be AI first, and really how much ROI gain can you get to out of being AI first. And we believe that that results in really economic EBITDA growth is what and we know that executives will push for that and need to see that some executives will need to push for that and need to see that in order to make the kind of time investment, economic investment, and technology investment to get people to change. And we're looking to shine a light on that playbook, that roadmap.
Just to put it into perspective, when you and I talked to Professor Ethan Mollick for the conclusion of our book, we were like pointing out the Harvard Business School BCG study that he led. And even though he's at Wharton, but he led this HBS BCG thing.
Yeah.
And he was just like, oh yeah, that just proves that AI can do the work of a BCG consultant. And yes, even before 4.0, that was with ChatGPT 4, you were seeing 40% quality uplifts, 25% productivity uplifts. Like just stop right there. That's on a prior model, not even at the advanced system level we're at today. And Mollick's like, yeah, 25 to 40% quantitative and qualitative lifts across every function is what you're talking about. If you do what Brice and the team at Moderna did, which is like fully ingrain it into the way they work, and we're sitting here going like, what's the ROI on that? And I think everybody that really is in the thick of it is saying, guys, it's kind of obvious. It's, it's massive productivity lift.
Let's double click on the ROI thing. I mean, I think this is not the first time or the last time that we'll double click on ROI. And I continue to be on the fence because on one hand, I see the common mistake in change efforts as on focusing on ROI too quickly. And if you listen to Brice, his use cases are not driven by business function or department. They're not focused on ROI. They're focused on increased productivity, and gave us a few examples. That's on the one hand of ROI. But on the other hand, businesses and leaders run off of ROI, and they really want to be able to make the case internally, whether it's 100-person organization, 1,000-person organization. They want to be convinced that they're making good business judgments, and measuring that in terms of impact on business and EBITDA growth or net income growth, profit growth is something that leaders are going to want to do. Where do you come down on that?
I think
And
that
oh, by the way, we struggle with this as a
I
business at
actually
Form
think that
3.
I think that we're on the verge of overthinking it. And what I mean by that is, I mean, I think we're talking about it because it comes up. So we're not overthinking it. But the reason we're on the verge of it is, remember you and I were on the phone with a private equity guy the other day, and
Yeah,
he was like, I was a skeptic of the internet. I was a skeptic of the Starbucks card. Remember? He's like,
yeah.
he's like, I'm not a
People are
skeptic.
skeptical.
Yeah, he goes, I'm not skeptical about it because I think about dozens of use cases every day. And he actually said, as a skeptic, I actually think that not enough CEOs are using this enough. And by the way, we've seen that from other private equity folks and other venture folks, meaning like, I mean, we talked to multiple, right? They're all like, hey, portfolio company CEOs, wake up. This is like the internet. This is like computers. So I think that's
Yeah.
the answer. I think maybe it's because we're a little bit older and longer in the
Yeah, no,
tooth.
I think that's right. And by the way, I think oftentimes executives tend to be a little bit older. And so, but if you talk to the younger generation, my guess is all the first year associates right out of college, they're all bought in hook, line, and sinker
Yeah.
into using the tool.
But
So
here's the thing though, I mean, it doesn't seem like that long to us because 'cause we're middle-aged guys, but like, it's been a moment since there's been a general purpose technology like the internet
advancement.
I mean, it's been at least, 30 years, 40 years, depending on how you wanna look at it, I mean, the internet came along, let's call it in '95 when the fervor came out, right? So, like, 94, 95, whatever it was. So that's 30 years, right? So, like, and then computers were 40 years ago. So for us, we're like, oh, it's just the last wave. But like it's been an entire, young worker's lifetime since they were born that there's been a moment where you're like, yeah, you don't need to like overthink the ROI on this. This is the holy shit moment that you had, and like the level of productivity times a million chats that Moderna is seeing, like it's you can put it in the bank that like they'd be crippled without it at this point, and it gives them a competitive advantage over those that don't get it.
You're reminding me of the one other thing that we talked about just briefly, ever so briefly after the interview, which we have not talked about here, which I think absolutely bears comment, which is your whole thing about demand, the demand for services as being the driver of the business versus the productivity gain. You said it so well earlier. You were making the point that productivity gain gives you across a million messages a month. You talked about it being like peanut butter and it's being used widely. And in our prior interview with Hugh at the Sounders, he talked about basically going into the annual planning and having an extra 3 hours per person, per employee, per day or per week, whatever the exact number was, but extra time that suddenly can be used for additional stuff. But the additional stuff is totally productivity gain is totally dependent really on the use
Oh,
of
that
that is
that
total.
there's demand. Yeah, what I was saying is that it doesn't so I'll give you a good example. This is an easy analogy. So I'll talk about Starbucks. So one of the few things in life I know. So at Starbucks, there's a certain amount of throughput and capacity that production line from the whether you mobile ordered or not, like from the POS to all the way through to them making your drinks and warming your food and gathering it up and putting it on the end. Okay. So when you get to a certain point, a number of orders per hour where like being able to be more productive and have more throughput and capacity really matters because every single bit of improvement in throughput and capacity, you can get more people through. But throughput and capacity, meaning i.e. productivity, doesn't matter if there's not a line, right? Like you can be
That's right.
like you can
If there's not a long line,
that's right. So, like, I lived through that notion. Like, it's top of mind for me. So if you go now extrapolate that out to the business level. If you're a growing business and there's demand for your services, and there's like because you've got product market fit, or you've got a great brand, or there's some secular change, a la Nvidia, where like everybody wants your product. Well, like productivity matters a lot at Nvidia right now. Like literally, like they can up their sales by billions of dollars with more productivity right now and throughput. And that's because there's more demand than there is capacity. And but if you that can go the other way, right? And all of a sudden it's like it doesn't matter how much more productivity you have if the demand's not there. So that has to do with productivity and throughput. There's also like the ability to use AI to generate demand, but by doing segmentation and insights and
Well,
personalization.
no, but your point is super valid in the case of Moderna because they've got increased productivity, as you say, increased supply, and suddenly RFK Jr. is in charge of maybe in charge of the Health and Human Services, and and if he has his way, the Moderna stock has suffered because there's a lot of skepticism about the
It could do
validity.
that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. But it,
yeah.
you
So
know,
I thought that was a really good point that it the productivity matters and demand still matters a lot for a business.
yeah. It's interesting, right? There's a whole like elasticity of demand and throughput and all that stuff that you got to like think about. And so, I mean, you even said it, not to go to the dark side, but you're like, will this all lead to layoffs? And I said to you, if you're in the customer service group, you're going to want to be like managing AI agents and be in the level 2 customer service side of it, because level 1 customer service is probably going to all become automated through AI.
Yeah,
However, outside of that, I think it depends. I think whether AI is going to take your job or not totally depends on the circumstances of the company too. Because like I said, like if if there's like so much demand, then AI is going to just augment what you're doing, and you can take all those little hours they save up, and they can redeploy them into these other things they wouldn't otherwise have been able to get to. So, you
yeah.
know,
I mean, it's an interesting, given Bryce's talk about invertebrates and left brain and right brain, which I thought was really well stated. You know,
yeah,
when you're relaxed and comfortable, you're excited for change, but when you're fearful, you're not. And
right,
um, you
yeah,
know, the application of this broadly, there's going to be increased media attention for sure on layoffs, and there will be some layoffs because the nature of work is going to for sure change,
yeah,
and I think that's going to make employees skeptical and fearful, which makes
yeah,
change harder. So I think navigating that to a calmer place to be able to capture the the genuine great things about generative AI harder.
100%.
Thanks everyone for listening to AI with Adam and Andy. To stay updated on the latest in AI and get exclusive content, check out our website, forum3.com, sign up for the email list, and follow us on LinkedIn. We truly believe you can't overinvest in AI. Onward. And one last thing, we put together a PDF case study based on Brice's insights from today on our show. It covers the 5 superpowers of AI and so much more in a really nice, concise way that allows you to share the knowledge with the rest of your leadership team. You can get it by going to forum3.com/podcast. That's forum3.com/podcast. And there you can download it totally for free. Because we're nice guys, we care. So that's our gift to you. Thanks, and have a great rest of the day. Onward.